Hello transport nerds and welcome back to Talking Planning. Today's episode is an important one for those of you who know about public transport in Sydney. So today is Saturday the 2nd of April and it's the final day for operation of State Transit Authority of New South Wales. Over the years, I'm sure many of you have caught state transit buses and some of you have probably maintained them, driven them, or maybe even planned their networks. Since their formation in 1989, STA has operated buses and ferries across Sydney and Newcastle. However, over the years, parts of the operation have been separated, with Sydney Ferries moving to Sydney Ferries Corporation and now on to Transdev, and buses being split off into Newcastle Transport, part of Keolis Downer, Transit Systems, Keolis Downer Northern Beaches, and the Busways group. Tomorrow, however, the remaining state transit operations will be taken over by Transdev John Holland Buses, and state transit will cease operations. So I thought it's only fitting to give them a proper send-off, and my ultimate goal was to actually try and catch one of State Transit's brand new custom denim elements as a final send-off, and showcase the last hurrah of State Transit before the change of operation. Unfortunately, despite my best efforts, I didn't manage to catch one, but at least I managed to spot one quickly, wind its way through Chatswood Interchange a couple of weeks ago. Presumably, it was getting ready for a rail replacement run, one of many on that particular day. While in Sydney, I did have a bit of a think about what would make a good alternative send-off video. I wanted something uniquely State Transit, and with that, let's give State Transit a proper send-off by checking out one of their most important bus deliveries in recent years, the Scania K280UB with a Bustech VST, wait for it, M body. As many of you would remember, there was a time before Bustech had made its mark on large government operators, but in 2013, that changed, with State Transit taking delivery of their very first Bustech, without it being a trial bus. Before this time, most recent deliveries to State Transit had been built by Volgren or Custom Coaches, and going further back by Austral Pacific, Ansett or Pressed Metal Corporation. And it is the last one that's most relevant for talking about today's bus, the Scania K280UB, with a Bustech VST M body. The M is short for MIDI, and these buses have just 39 seats, and are only 11 metres long, a little bit shorter than the standard 12.5 metres of most modern route buses. These vehicles were very important for State Transit, as they allowed the retirement of the 11.1 metre long PMC bodied Mercedes 0405 Mark V in early 2016. This was particularly important for services like the 326, 327, 328 and 355, which wind through some very tight streets, and a standard length 12.5 metre bus would have great difficulty with that. My understanding is that the use of standard sized buses is actually prohibited on such services. Before the VSTMs were introduced, there was actually no wheelchair accessible option on these routes, as the MAN 11220 middies that used to be part of State Transit were either sold off or sent up to Newcastle. This ended up prolonging the life of these old 0405s, which lacked air conditioning and of course were not wheelchair accessible. So for regular commuters, the K280UB VSTM was a massive upgrade. Today's review was filmed on board a 313 service, which didn't strictly require the shorter length. But it does make it easier for drivers to nip through traffic. Scania also make it easy to differentiate vehicle models, so the K280UB has 280 horsepower and 1400 newtons of torque, which is excellent for winding around tight and steep streets, especially when paired with this 6-speed ZF. So let's have a listen now. The first defining feature of the VSTM body is its shorter length, and it makes for some unusual looking proportions. State Transit has almost always tried its hardest to fit dual-leaf rear doors, but the VSTM's shorter length meant that single-leaf rear doors were pretty much a must to ensure they had enough seating space and account for the sloped floor of the Bustech body style. Still, it works quite well, and the seats are fairly comfortable, have decent space, and of course are now trimmed in the infamous State Transit graffiti fabric. My question is, with State Transit disappearing, will that disappear too? To be fair, it's had a pretty good run now, for 30 years odd, and it's probably time to switch it up for something a little bit fresher. These buses also swapped out the polished steel handrails for yellow powder coat, something that went out of fashion on Sydney buses for a while, but I think the yellow is nice if you don't like bumping into handrails, if you're not always 100% careful. I have heard plenty of opinions on State Transit buying Bustechs, which range from extreme excitement to extreme disappointment, but personally I've always been quite fond of them, although I will admit the VSTM is probably the pick of the bunch, as the sloped floor can be less than ideal for standing passengers on busy services, which seems to be more the domain of the 12.5 metre models. So now that we are nearing the end of our journey on this bus, it's time to talk about the next generation of bus travel in Sydney. Over the past few years, region by region, we have seen the transition from State Transit over to Transit Systems, Keolis down in Northern Beaches, Busways, and the final region will be transferred to Transdev John Holland Buses tomorrow. On my most recent trip to Sydney a couple of weeks back, I noticed that most state transit buses no longer wore their state transit stickers in preparation for the takeover. And whilst I certainly can admit I do have some sadness in seeing state transit cease operations, I think it will be really interesting to see the evolution of bus travel in Sydney. With the importance of reducing emissions growing day by day and the need for transport operations to respond, it will be interesting to see what Transdev's next move is and what vehicles they plan to transition to over the coming months and years. As this neat little K280UB Mini departs, I think it's time to bid a final and fond farewell in the best way that I know how, a photo montage of some state transit snaps from over the years. So thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you again soon.